Alright, in this video I'm going to cover UV distortion, what it is, how to adjust it manually. You'll find that there are more automated processes for this and better tools for dealing with this, but it's important conceptually to understand what causes UV distortion in the first place, so you know what to look for if you're troubleshooting a problem. Alright, so I'm in the Understanding UV Distortion MA file, so go ahead and open that file. I also have a perspective in UV split going on here, so if you don't have this and you want to put this on one monitor, panels, save layouts, and then perspective and UV editor. So that's the one that I have going on. If you have two monitors or if you have an ultra wide, I would recommend go ahead and split that off so that your UV editor is a separate window, but because we're dealing with limited real estate here, I'd go ahead and just have them on a split thing like this. If you want to do it as a separate window, just bring up UV editor right here and that'll pop that to a new window. You can see that it drops out of that one. So I'll go ahead and set that back to what we had here. Okay, so if I select this is the first layer right here. So each object is on its own layer, and really what I want to show you here is just that the way that the image, the texture source, looks in the UV editor is exactly what it will look like in your 3D space, as long as the proportions of the shape of the faces are exactly the same. So you can see in this case this is a perfect square and this one's a perfect square, and so because of that there is no distortion. So there you can see that all the individual checkers are perfectly square. That's the reason we use this checker pattern in the first place. It makes it really easy to recognize where there's distortion in that mesh. So you really just need to match up the shape and proportions between the UVs and the real world space, and everything will work out fine. So I'll go ahead and pull this out to the next one, and I'll just sort of pan over so you can see it's just sort of stacked to the right here, and I'll go ahead and select that one. So you can see that the way this is if nothing's selected you won't see any in the overlays, but if you just select your object it will show the texture on that. Alright, so I'm going to zoom back in here to fill this back up. And what we got going here is just a demonstration that it doesn't really matter the orientation of the faces, as long as the proportion, the shape itself is the same, it's perfectly fine. So you can see here that this one is rotated relative to how it is in the UV space, and there's no distortion here. You can see that the UV letters and numbers here are set on their side, and if you wanted to, you could go ahead and rotate your UVs as well, and you can see by doing that I could straighten them out so it looks exactly the same in either place. But in this case this would actually be worse for UVs, because now I'm going to have to deal with aliasing along these edges here, and aliasing of course is the stair-stepping of pixels, and anti-aliasing blends those pixels together to try to keep things looking more consistent. When you can, you should always try to arrange your UV shells so that edges are running along the pixel grid, so either horizontal or vertical, and that means that you won't have any alias along those edges. It's just at a different angle than this, which is perfectly fine. This is a much better layout for this, and this is the way that should be left. Okay, again I'm going to sort of pull out here. I'm going to turn on layer 3, just the V next to 3, and I'm going to click here and zoom back in here. So now you can see what I have here is this does look distorted. So you can look at the individual checkers here. I'll just press Q to turn off my rotate manipulator there, and you can see here that these are stretched, right? Each one of these looks like a sort of a vertically oriented rectangle, and even the text itself looks distorted. So what you have to do here is you have to match the aspect ratio of this face over here, right? So this is the shape that you've modeled. This is probably not something you're going to change to match to textures. Occasionally you will modify a mesh, a 3D mesh, to match a texture, but in this case we're following the more standard workflow, which is your model's set, you make adjustments over here in your UV space. So in this case what I would do is I would grab either one side or both sides. If I grab one side I move it, if I grab both sides I scale it. I'll show you both ways. So I just press W for the move tool, and I'll just slide this over until these look square. So I can sort of zoom in on this and try to see where they look square. So here you can see they're still squished. This I've gone a little too far, and so you're really just trying to find that right balance, like two that's gone too far. This one's not far enough. That one's pretty much perfect, right? So it's just about half. So with the move tool, that's basically how you do that. If you wanted to scale that, it would work exactly the same. You would just grab both sides and just scale them together like this. And when you get to about half, you can see that the individual checkers look nice and square. So again, as you do this, you're looking at the proportion, like how wide is this relative to how tall it is here, right? That you're matching that proportion right there. All right, we'll go to another one here. So again, I'll just back up and move over and then select. So you can see that right now I have UV mode selected, so you don't see the checkers. I just press F8 on the keyboard in order to switch back to object mode, and then you can see the textures show up. So here you can see what distortion looks like, and it gets really quirky to sort of figure out. So given what I've shown you on the other ones, take a second, go ahead and pause the video, take a second, and try to make this over here match this so that there's no distortion here. Just go ahead and pause it for just a second, and then come back and I'll show you how to do it. All right, so so there are lots of different ways to do this. You could sort of manually grab the UV, so I'm just a right click, select UV, and I could just kind of pull this in. And what I would want to do here is look at this and say, okay, this one's moved in relative to this edge, like it's not straight up, and it's moved down relative to that edge as well. So I'd want to sort of just drag that in, something like that, in order to create that shape. And what I'm looking for is, does that angle right there, is that pretty close? And it's fairly close. This one too. Same thing here. Just kind of drag it up, try to find about the right place. Something like that looks pretty close. You can see the shape is pretty close, and because of that, the distortion's largely removed. It's not completely removed, but it's largely removed. Now in this case, the easier way to do this is to grab both of those and just scale them to center. And so I'll sort of pull in here so I can see this with a little bit more accuracy. So there you can see that's pretty much what that shape is right there. Really though, again, what you're trying to do with this is match up the overall shape and proportions from the 3D space to your UV space. And then, as you get into fine details, then I'm sort of looking at those checkers, trying to see, like, am I making them better or worse? Like, I'm fine tuning it by looking at the texture itself, but I'm getting the overall shape first to make sure that I'm really close. Right? It can get very confusing, and it's very simple with a single face like this. It can get very confusing with more complex geometry. All right, so that will give you the basic setup there. And you can see that as this is, it's not that bad, right? So with a single face, not that bad. We turn on layer 5, and now you've got this. And this is the default UV layout for this, which you can see is just an absolute hot mess, just complete disaster. So on this is kind of this shows the end of the line on this method that I've been showing you, because here are the vertices on this thing. Are you going to redraw this thing over here in UV space? That would be absolutely ridiculous to sit here and try to grab a UV and move it and then find where would the next one be and grab that and move it. All right, this is just not how you would possibly do this. So this is not, I'm not showing you this as a way to show you this is how UVs are done. I'm showing you this because conceptually it really helps you understand where distortion comes from. Now the tools you would actually use for something like this is, because this is a flat plane, you would just use a planar projection. You can see that this orients to the Z. So all I would do in this particular case is UV, and I would do a planar projection. And when I do a planar projection, I just want to make sure that it's set to, I want to be on bounding box. I want to project from the Z axis. And then you want to make sure that keep image width height ratio is on. That is off by default, or it has been in previous versions of Maya. Make sure that that's on, or else it will distort whatever you do here. And then just click project. Right, and so what it does is it just creates a projection from the Z axis, and you can see that it's perfect. Like, all the UVs are nice and clean. That's because we have a plane that we're projecting onto. So we're perpendicular to that with the projection, so it's distortion free. So in the end, this works exactly the same as those simple faces. It's just a much more complex face. But the key thing to take away from this is this shape right here looks exactly like this shape right here, and because of that, there's no distortion.